I wish this book were longer, you know? They're definitely more ponderous I could work through.
Do that. They're all about the same size, to be honest.
Yeah, it's a shame that the writing on the spines isn't. That irritates me.
What happened?
Different font sizes and... But that's just my OCD.
How do you know that? They all look the same to me. What's happened?
I don't have a set of books yet, so mine haven't arrived, but I saw a picture of someone's on Twitter and all the names of the titles and that on the side of the books are all slightly different fonts.
Let me just put them in, because now you freak me out.
Is that not the case?
Looks similar font, but...
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, I think it might depend on the thickness of the book.
I think we ought to discuss that.
I think it's critical.
I think it's a serious point. That's all right, though. They're all there.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. That meets with your approval. You just hate the books.
Not true.
I've got now. Get 5 out. Right. Honestly, I don't know what we're going to find to chat for 45 minutes. But people have got some interesting questions. Let's just see if we can come up with the most outrageous answer. Oh, we're live now, and Willie just caught us. I just got a text saying, that's you live now with me telling you all to have the most outrageous answer to a question. All right. So let me just sort of do some sort of intro. So foolishly, Christian Focus have put me in charge of doing this sort of whatever this thing's called. Is it a Facebook live feed thingy? It doesn't really matter, whatever it is, to publicize the launch of our new First Step series, 10 books, beloved by Andy Prime. We'll get onto that in a minute. We're going to look we are the authors of the first 5 books between us. I did 2, the other 3 are a bit lazier than that. They did, well, Prime did 1, Andy Mathieson did 1, and Mike did half a book. So, but we'll talk about his half. It's an important half. I've got to say at the beginning, because I've got things to say. I'm a real professional, by the way. I sat in my bed in my pajamas, in case you care. But anyway, we are going to be giving away a box set of this at some point. I've no idea when, but at some point soon, I've been told. We're going to give another set away about 15 minutes in. Again at 30 minutes, and if you stay to the end, if you're that sad and you haven't got a life and you stay to the end, really think about your options in life. But you could also, apparently, 3 people can win a box set each and 2 of my other books. So, you know, if that last person there is on their own, ring your gran, get your next door neighbor around and, you know, get them a free box set. All right.
Mez, I've just had a mate text me saying he's so hot he's watching this in his pants. So can he get a set just for that?
Listen, yes. Willie, hot man in his pants, get his dress. That's how we roll. If you've got that level of interaction with us, you're in with a chance of winning. All right. So I know Willie is somewhere. His bald head is shining with the sweat, thinking, what has he done? First question, when did you all become Christians? Okay, let's start with, why don't we just introduce ourselves? We'll start with Mike and then Andy Mathieson, Andy Prime, just a bit about who you are, etc. How you became a Christian.
I'll go first. Mike McKinley. So I pastor a church called Sterling Park Baptist Church, right outside of Washington, D.C. I've been here for about 15 years. Married to Karen for almost 23 years, 5 kids, one of whom is going off to university soon. I became a Christian when I was maybe 11 years old. So my family never went to church growing up. But basically, long story short, my mom moved out. She wound up renting a room in town with a woman who's a Christian. That woman led her to the Lord, and she started taking me to church. And I think the first time I heard the gospel, I was converted on the spot as an 11-year-old. So,
cool. Right, and you wrote, we'll get to it later, you wrote the book Believe in our series, the 5th book in the series, which is about Christian introduction to Christian doctrine, right? We'll get onto that. Okay, Mathieson.
I'm Andy Mathieson. I'm pastor at Lochie Baptist Chapel in Dundee. I've been here 5 years. Church began 3 years ago, a little over 3 years ago now. Married to Lauren, got 3 kids who are going down to bed at the moment, hence why I'm sitting in the garden. Been a believer since I was 23, so 15 years. Grew up in a Christian home, knew the gospel, wanted nothing to do with it, ran away into mess and madness, and the Lord brought me back just through the faithful prayers of my mother and witnessing of my family. I got saved when I was 23. So, there you go.
Remy?
So Andy Prime, married to Sarah, dad to Ruben, and pastor of Graceman Community Church in the south side of Edinburgh. We've been here 3 years in terms of since launch. Was saved probably mid-teens, so grew up in a Christian family, mum and dad who really faithfully lived out and taught me the gospel, but didn't really grasp it until I remember my dad teaching at a kind of football camp that he put on for our church, taught on the Wise and Foolish Builders at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, and probably for the first time just been really convicted of sin. Had done a lot of hearing God's word and very little putting into practice. And then about around that time as well, my auntie passed away with cancer, and first time I'd experienced death. And I guess those two things, being confronted with sin and death, kind of pushed me to Christ. So yeah, probably mid-teens.
Cool. Am I supposed to? Do you think I'm supposed to say something as well?
Probably.
All right.
Everyone knows who you are, mate.
I'm Mez. You all know who I am. I'm the pastor of Nidri Community Church in Edinburgh. I've been here 13 years, 14th year this year. Been pastoring 20 odd years. Was converted 20 odd years ago. Got convicted of my sin, and got converted reading a Matthew Henry commentary on the Bible, the book of Romans specifically. And yeah, that's it. Right. Andy Constable question. Why has Mez got a hat on when it's so hot outside?
He doesn't want to show off his hair.
Well, because I've got no trousers on, and I'm losing a lot of heat downstairs. I wanted to keep the heat in upstairs. Okay, Andy. Andy Constable, by the way, is my co-pastor. He is follically challenged. He's 23 years old. Andy Prime chooses to look like that. Andy Constable has been forced to look like he does by nature itself. Okay, so let's get on with these books. So one of the in all seriousness now, talk about the books. This project has been like years in the making. I mean, I can't remember when I first spoke to you about this, Prime. Remember when you first taught a little series at the church on the book of Proverbs, and I said we need to make this into a book. I've been in ministry for a long time, worked with people from council estates, poor communities, people who aren't, not that people aren't readers in our community, but they're not big readers. And particularly new Christians looking to understand more about the Bible, looking to grow in their relationship with the Lord. There's very few resources in the UK, I'm not about the US, but in the UK, specifically designed for people from our communities. And what I mean by that is there's lots of books on discipleship, lots of books on doctrine. We've not written anything new, but the illustrations will be all very sort of middle class about the opera or this or that, or, rugby or whatever, things out with our culture. We wanted to write something that could help people from our culture. The idea behind the 10 books is this. The overarching premise is, as pastors or as a pastor, I believe it's my responsibility to, in my teaching and preaching, to prepare all God's people for works of service. That means when someone is saved, they're saved by the Lord for a specific purpose, to serve within their local church and to serve the local church and the broader community. And so we wanted to write, this is basically these 10 books are our first year discipleship program, how to take someone straight off the streets, come to Jesus through what should they be learning about it in their first year. My first book is evangelistic. We'll get into the specifics in a minute. The second one is on why did my life just get so complicated? I've become a Christian. Voices, can we trust the Bible? Mike's on doctrine, character training. Why do we need the church? Relationship, service. I mean, these are all really important topics as any believer in any church needs to grow, but specifically we wanted to write them contextualized for our communities. So have any of you guys been using them, and if so, have they been helpful? Yeah, I mean, I found that people have found the first two books the best.
Yeah, clearly.
Clearly.
Most people don't like the color of this one. They think that's awful. But I know all of us have used at least one of the books, some of the books, right? Mm-hmm. So in all seriousness, how have you been using them primarily, or how have they been used in Gracemount?
I think just going back slightly, I remember that when we sat down with you and MSD and having a pub lunch in Falkirk, when we kind of dreamt the whole thing up and came up with the titles, and particularly the kind of USP of how do we help someone from our community engage with these important topics that we want to. And so the kind of weaving a story through each book and the guy asking questions and seeking to answer them. I think that's been the thing that's been most helpful, is people have engaged with these books to make the book not just a monologue, but a dialogue where someone's going, oh yeah, that's the question I've had bashing around my head for ages, or yeah, this is the thing I'm wrestling with. And so I think the evangelistic one has been good, and we've given it away at kind of community days and to unbelievers lots. I think the one that's been most helpful for us is the war one, because it's the one that's made most sense of most people's experience. So the simple question on the title is going, why has life got harder? Because I think however much we try and help people count the cost of becoming a Christian, there's still something in people's heads that goes, surely this will make my life better immediately. And so the helpfulness of introducing them to the realities of fighting the world, the flesh and the devil has just been so vital for setting expectations that will help someone, Lord willing, endure and persevere. So we've worked through different ones with different groups and different people, but I think the war one has been the most kind of widely used for us.
And all joking aside, the war ones, it's not just because I wrote it, but it's my favorite as well, because it's all, let's come to Jesus, amen, say a prayer, it's going to be brilliant, and then they get absolutely body slammed. I mean, what are some of the issues some of your new believers are facing in their particular communities as they come to faith in Christ?
Is that a question for me? Or
that's anyone? A question for anyone, Mike, or anyone can jump in on that one.
Do you think you're better than us now? Is one of the classics. Yeah. I know you, and who do you think you are? Think you're better than us, being the other end of that question. Just as Primey said, people suddenly finding friends, family, and particularly close friends and family, suddenly having a problem with them and in their face. And as Primey said as well, just that inbuilt assumption that coming to Christ, right, I've come to Christ, I'm saved, all these words and security that we comfort people with, and the realities we are trying to comfort people with, we almost assume that means ease, and it's just kind of knocking that away and helping to bat it back and go, no, security, safety are what help us get through the war, not not save us from it.
I think one of the convictions behind why I wrote War is when I was first converted and saved into a normal sort of middle-class evangelical church, I was just given a Bible and told to pitch up at certain times. Nobody told me about the devil or the flesh or the world, or my head was just battered. I mean, I came to Jesus. It's like I thought, yeah, well, it's going to be great now. Life's going to be good, and actually, life got just completely much more complicated, and particularly with family. I think people who don't live and work in our types of communities don't understand the massive cultural pressure that is on you as soon as you become a Christian, because to become a Christian in our communities is to join the other side, because the church is seen as a sort of posh person's group. In our communities, it's seen like you're leaving your working class roots and you're trying to think you're better than someone else, and that cannot be underplayed as part of the warfare that Satan uses. Family are great. At first, we're like, oh, I'm stop taking me heroin and I'm following Jesus. They're like, oh, it's amazing. It's brilliant. And then when you start getting a bit more serious, then real problems start. And people then, that's then when the church has got to step in and become, if you like, their surrogate family. And help these guys understand. Just let me just stop for a second. I keep getting distracting messages from Willie. Andy, can you put some earbuds in? Mathieson, we're getting feedback.
I'll need to go grab some headphones from inside.
Just disappear. We're a professional outfit, as you can tell. So one of the other things in the war book as well is we look at how do you fight temptation? What happens when you fall? What happens when you fall is really important, because when I first, I became a Christian, I was up to all sorts, and then I sinned. I think I scored some drugs, and I just kept it hidden. I thought, that's me. I'm finished. Christian life is over. No one had taught me that I'm gonna sin. What do I do when I sin? How do I confess my sin, etc., etc.? And so from that perspective, the war book is really, really, really helpful. And again, just so people understand, each book is based around the story of a man or a woman or a couple who have a different experience. Some of them in England, some of them in the US. One's in, I think Mike's is in Salvador, is he?
It's a Salvadoran kid in America.
Yeah, a Salvadorian kid. Well, come on, that's not a bad to remember, at least half of it. And it gives them a unique flavor of the struggles that they're going through. Primey, talk to us about voices. So I know you struggle a lot with voices, don't you?
Yeah. It came out of preaching Proverbs 1-9 at Nidri before we launched. And shout out to Steve McCallum, as one of the guys who loved it, and the kind of repeated refrain of "Listen, my son," which comes a lot. I think the helpfulness of it for communities like ours is partly just a fear of the Lord thing. We've got a community who is living in fear, and even every act of violence is normally fueled by some kind of deep-rooted insecurity, and so. Yeah. Not just the fear of the Lord, Proverbs 1, in terms of the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, but the positive side of that in terms of the fear of the Lord leads to life in Proverbs 19. And it brings contentment, it brings security. And so the first book works through that, but also even just the kind of fatherhood stuff in a community where lots of people lack either a father figure entirely or have a very negative experience of a father. To have the voice of a perfect heavenly Father speaking into their life in those early days of discipleship when the war is really intense, we found it really beneficial. And interestingly, probably particularly real during lockdown, when families are all of a sudden living on top of each other, it's not just revealing the importance of the kind of spiritual disciplines in the home, but whether or not the mother and father in a Christian home or one or other are doing the work of Proverbs 1 so that their kids are saying, don't forsake your father's teaching, or, don't despise your mother's instruction. And so that kind of fatherhood thing's been really useful. But the book also looks at things like integrity. What does that look like? Self-control, and again, the community where the people who lose control the most are the persons who are lauded the most. Losing self-control is seen as a positive escapism, or the kind of guy who's the most kind of feared. And so what does genuine self-control look like, and where does that come from? And so it's just trying to work through what are all these voices in my head, how do I discern the voice of the Lord, and why is that a good thing as I try and battle that. So it just works through Proverbs 1-9 as a kind of exposition, trying to help people say, what does it mean to listen to God, and how does that lead to life?
I think, again, Proverbs, I love the book of Proverbs, and I think the book of Proverbs is the best book to use when counseling addicts. I think it's brilliant. absolutely amazing, particularly this stuff with voices, because we're all listening to voices every single day. It doesn't matter who we are, particularly in our communities. And Proverbs boils down to two things, right? Wisdom or folly. It's as simple as that. Right. I'm getting a question from Victor Gonzalez. What problems is the church in the UK facing that are similar or different to that of the USA? And how will these books help in these contexts? Well, come on, Mike, you're an expert on UK culture. You come over here and drink craft beer. Tell us.
I'm actually interested to hear your answers, so I can fill in the US scene. But
what do we think, boys? What Victor Gonzalez? I'm not sure where he's from, but what problems in the church are similar or different to that to the USA? I mean, I could answer this question, but
I mean, Mez, maybe you could speak to even the difference just between like class and ethnicity.
Yeah.
So in America, that race or ethnicity tends to be our issue, whereas I've heard you speak to the fact that in the UK it tends to be a class distinction, which doesn't immediately resonate with me as being my experience in American churches.
Okay, let me just say we've got our first winner, Saoirse Clarabella Stephen, and she's got that just for the name, because that is a banging name, isn't it? Saoirse Clara, she gets a box set. Please tell me, text me, Willie, I know you're out there. Tell me the man in his undies has got a box set. Please. I want a positive on the underpants guy. We need to get him a box set. Speak to the difference of culture. I mean, I've traveled extensively and spoken in both countries. What was interesting in the early days when I was out in the States talking about our experience in the schemes, a lot of black guys were turning up to the talks and were surprisingly agreeing. I've got a text saying, fine. Yeah, the underpants guy, he's going to get a box set. And I was confused. I was like, why are these black guys, some of them coming in from the projects, coming into here, a little white dude working in Scottish council estates to talk? And then when I got talking to them, actually our experience is not that dissimilar. Obviously there's much more, we're not getting shot in the streets and nonsense like that, but the sort of, there's almost a real link, isn't there, between race and class in the UK. The UK is riven with class division, and again, one of the reasons we wrote this book is because there's really no material aimed at, leveled at, or appropriate for people from our communities. So that sort of racial divide in the USA is somewhat mirrored by the class divide in the UK. What else do you think the differences are, Primey? Because you've come in as a middle class guy into our culture, right? To plant a church, and so you'll have fought a few battles.
Yeah, I can't really speak to the difference between UK and US because my experience of the US is nothing. But I think the class thing is...
You can speak to the class difference, can't you?
Yeah, and I think for me, it's been a challenge of coming from somewhere where I was completely ignorant of it, so didn't know it existed, and then having to learn not just the difference in culture to plant a church across cultures, but to deal with some of the emotional baggage that's kind of come with that. And it's one of those kind of things that when you begin to see it, you begin to see it everywhere. And it's not just a relational, personal thing. There is the kind of institutional side of it as well, which is largely true in the way that churches in the UK tend to reach out to poorer communities or just neglect them entirely. And I think that's both in terms of how we preach, the applications we use, the clothes we wear, the way we do church. All these kind of things are just weighted towards those who thrive in a middle class culture, and they demand that someone from outside of the culture changes and adapts to the majority rather than that majority adapting to those who are kind of naturally excluded from it. And I think that's been part of the challenge. Interestingly, I think it's true in the way that a lot of books are written. That's why I love this series. there's a really great book out there at the moment, which I love. It's a great book. But in the first page, it uses the word parsimonious. And then the very next sentence says, that is to say, this book is for normal Christians. Now, the book is epic. It's an unbelievably good book. But as soon as you use words like parsimonious and say, this is normal Christianity, you are excluding a huge swathe of people.
What does parsimonious?
Yeah, I don't have a clue. And that's the problem. But if you're saying that's normal, then you're already being exclusive in the way you write. And so I think just even that simplicity of not presuming whether it's biblical language or even this kind of just flowery kind of rejoicing in rhetorical nonsense, which actually just excludes people by the nature of what it is. So I think there's lots of little subtle ways which even just our definition of what is normal is excluding those who are not. And we need to be really careful about that.
There are lots of similarities. When Mike and I had fun when we were first writing Church in Hard Places, which is available online with Amazon. Because I would write a chapter and you go, well, I'm not feeling that. And it was interesting, wasn't it? We had some backwards and forwards on my very aggressive way of writing style back then. And he was just like, we need to think this through. But the similarities are there. Long-term, endemic, generational unemployment, drugs, crime, severe mental health difficulties, the lack of access to basic services. These are, I mean, yeah, they're found in the projects or the trailer parks of America as they're found in the council estates and schemes of the United Kingdom. So there's a lot of crossover. The cultural, there are cultural things that are particular to our country as there are to America. But again, these books, initially I was going to just write them from a Scottish perspective, but I don't know who convinced me to allow each book be from a different place in the world and a different culture to give it a more sort of world flavor. We've got another question from Victor. It's a good one. And we might all do this differently, so this will be interesting. How do you use the books? Do you just give them to people, or do you work through them together? Mike?
Yeah, I tend to work through them with new believers. So just a few weeks ago, had a guy from I do a Bible study with guys from a local Alcoholics Anonymous chapter, and guy came to Christ, and so I skipped over the first book because it felt like we'd kind of covered the evangelism piece of it, but just started him off with war and reading it with him. So he and I, there's one other guy in the group, so the three of us have a phone call each week and talk through the reading, and just using it kind of as a just conversation starter, discipleship tool. Just really
to read the chapter in advance, and then you talk it through.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, have them read through the chapter. Give them some Bible reading to do during the week, and then we talk about it for about an hour. Don't spend the whole hour just talking about the book, but using it as a conversation starter and just a way to get some more kind of another voice in his head, more content. So what's really helpful about these books and why they're so useful. So in our context, a lot of our very poor people are Spanish speaking or Arabic speaking, and these books aren't as useful for them, given that they can't read them. But in terms of English speakers, we see there's really kind of two kinds of folks that come to Christ. One are folks who are coming from a church background. They know the Bible, they just haven't believed it their whole life. And so, kind of maybe like some of our testimonies, like just, they come to Christ and they come preloaded with all this information. They know how to do church. They know how to read the Bible. The other kind of people are folks who have never opened a Bible before. We had one guy come to Christ and he's like, so do I have to confess to a priest now, or like when's the mass? And we're like, okay, yeah, we're actually not Catholic. So like knows nothing about anything. And so these books are so useful because there really aren't many resources I know that don't assume any knowledge. So that's just what's really helpful about them, is that you don't have to hand the book and be like, okay, now you're not going to understand half of what this book's about or what they're saying, but just being able to use the books, to start with somebody who doesn't have all that background has been so helpful.
What about you boys, Andy, Mathieson?
Yeah, similarly, I've given some people the books away. Usually I'll give the book and then encourage people to work through it with, and we've seen some people willing to do so. Some take it away and come back later and say, I read your book, or I read that, it was interesting. But yeah, try and work through it as much as we can and use it. As Mike said, the idea of just covering this area is largely Roman Catholic, and sort of being able to demythologize. So as you say, even people who are engaging, even though they've probably never stepped foot inside a chapel in their life, or maybe for a wedding or a funeral, but that's it. They've got that kind of assumptions of what is or what they should be doing, and just kind of being able to demythologize and kind of knock the edges off and just use the simple, straightforward language. It's good. We've read them directly with guys. Sometimes even sat and like read the chapter through as part of the study. I'll read a section of the chapter, come to the questions, and stop there and just talk about the questions. There's guys that are.
There's a lot of stopping in the book. It's very the chapters are very start on purpose. There's not masses of paragraphs to read. It's very scenario. This is how this guy's thinking. What do you think?
Yeah, so with guys that I'm less convinced will read it at home, I will actually do that. We'll read the smaller chunk, and then just come to the questions and really just use those questions, those stops, as a discussion point for the day. Or guys that are even less competent readers, we'll do that with as well. So yeah, we use it in various ways.
Finally, same.
It's the same. We've done it one-on-one with guys. We've given it away to them. We've done it in our men's Bible study, just working through a kind of chapter a month type thing. And I think there's usefulness in both ways. There are some people that it's just better to be reading with them on the spot. But there's also a sense in which you want to give people space so that they're not entirely dependent upon us. And I think that's the tension, or in some ways the beauty of lockdown at the moment, in that in this first step stuff, we're saying maturity is not necessarily you moving towards independence, because you become part of a body, you're a family. But at the same time, it's not complete dependence where if we step back, you fall away. And I think that's the benefit of actually lockdown and what that's revealing, and that it's revealing who has that personal, dynamic, alive relationship with Jesus that is not dependent on us. And it's revealing those who actually, some of our structures where we're meeting with people on a daily basis and we've got lots of stuff to come to, are actually just kind of a scaffolding that's propping up a corpse. And actually, as that stuff's been removed, it's kind of helping us see where people are really at, and whether people want Christianity for just the community or if they just actually want it for Christ. And I think that's kind of the benefits of doing both. Sometimes doing everything with them, but then stepping back and allowing the word to do its work.
Right, Charles Patterson, you're our second winner, apparently. And just on going back, just to sort of round up the talk about how we teach it. At Niddry, we do it depending on the person. What's the level of reading? Obviously, we've got high levels of people who are not. Some people are completely illiterate to along the spectrum of reading. So if it's someone that I think they can manage it, then I'll say, look, read a chapter, let's have a yak about it. Others, I'll read it with them, and I have taught them in groups as well. Whereas I've just used it as a textbook and just got maybe 3 or 4 guys together who are interested and just used it as in a sort of lesson style. So it just depends how many people you've got in front of you, what their levels are, etc. They are meant to be flexible. It's not just one way. And when you read it, you'll see what I mean. Even the way we've spaced things out. And I know we had a big thing with CFP about why we're spacing things out so much, and short things and dark and light. And it's just we're trying to keep people very short, manageable chunks to reinforce it. Okay. I have some more questions coming in. Let me have a look. What are the issues for you in reaching and caring for the children in your community? Anyone? I'm not sure that's pertinent to these books, but he sent it through to me. Mike?
Yeah, so for us, our community, so we're in the fastest growing and richest county in America, but our actual like town is about 95% immigrants. So folks who've been in the country for less than a year or so. 95, I think 92% of the kids at the local elementary school don't speak English at home. The living conditions, oftentimes you have 16, 18 people in a home, family of 5. I mean, my wife is out right now delivering a used mattress to a family that's been sleeping on the floor for the last 9 months with their like 5, family of 5. So there's a lot of just a lot of needs, learning how to read, food. Honestly, it's just a safe environment when both if mom and dad are both present, they're both working all day. And so there's just a lot of those needs with kids that are a really great opportunity to care for them, but also to reach their families. So we do a lot of provision of food and tutoring, Bible clubs for kids and things like that as ways to reach out and get to know families, and then try to just build relationships with them as best we can and get them plugged into the ministry of the church.
Brimey, because you do. Youth at the church was launched off the back of the work of your wife for many years, right?
Yeah, and so kids are loved here. They're I guess they would kind of be idolized in lots of ways, but at the same time, the victims of that generation, some cases unemployment, abuse, kind of no investment in education, all that kind of thing. And that's been exaggerated at the moment when kids are not at school, because school becomes a place of routine and refuge, and where some of these things, I guess, are exposed, but also where they get breakfast, lunch. And so, yeah, there's a tremendous need in our community for reaching out to kids. Ultimately, that's going to happen, I think, as families are saved. And so our youth and children's ministry has to be a family thing. Often the most important person to win is the mother, because it's a matriarchal society. But yeah, it's a challenge. I don't think these books are particularly aimed at them, but you kind of hope, as hopefully parents are saved reading these, that these things will have an impact. Even the Proverbs one wasn't meant to be a father who's instilling wisdom in his son rather than passing on folly. Yeah.
Okay, a question that's come up a couple of times is, do you need to read the books in order, or can they be just used standalone? So let me sort of answer that, since it sort of was my initial brainchild. I think the best use of these books is in order. It's not that you can't use these things individually, but we design them specifically, if you think about it, in the life of a new Christian, to start at the beginning. What if somebody who'd never, like Mike described, never read a Bible, didn't know anything about anything, walked into your church, heard the gospel, and got converted? What would you want to teach them? Year one. How do you, as a pastor, as a church leader, whoever's watching this, mentoring, discipling someone, what do you want to instill in them? What foundations do you want to put in place in them in their first year of walking with Jesus Christ? And so that's why we obviously started with the gospel, the first one. The second one is, listen, you've heard the gospel, but trust me, book number 2, there's a war coming. The flesh, the world, the devil, you're going to fall. This temptation's going to come. Sin's going to come in. How do you cope with that? The third one is, and listen, all these voices now are going to be conflicting around you. Should you do this? Should you do that? Oh, the church is trying to brainwash you. These people are trying to do this and that. And what do I do? I've got 3 kids and with 2 different women in the same community. What do I do about all that? That's the voices. Then we went with the Bible, obviously, the basis for all of our doctrinal foundation, the basis for everything we're teaching is the Bible. Then, so can we trust it? Don't assume that, because most of my mates thinks, you know, fruit bats made it up. So, and then we get onto the belief, Mike, with the basic stats of the basic doctrines of the faith, what we believe. We start building the foundation a bit more, and Sharon does one on character, growing godly character. And then Isaac's more on training in terms of discipleship. Garrett's one is on the church, the importance of the church. What's the point of church? Why do I need to go to church? What's church all about? What's an elder? What's a deacon? You know, the things that Christian people don't think about, they just take for granted. They're just weird things to our people. Then we'll talk about relationships. And then the last book is on service. In other words, very often in poor communities, ministry is done to poor people by more affluent people. And sometimes people are converted through some sort of mercy ministry or some sort of outreach. And they generally, particularly in the UK, I'm not speaking into Mike's situation or the US, but in our culture, guys from poor communities where they're saved, they're generally wheeled out for a testimony now and again, because it sounds quite exciting. They are left on the sidelines with the basic bare minimum knowledge about Jesus. And they're never taught that actually you've been saved to serve Jesus. And Christian life is not just you taking from us. Well, I'll go to church because they'll give me this or they'll give me that. But actually, it's about serving the body that you've been saved into. And so for me, I think you should read them in order. There is a reason and a rationale behind why we did it. That's not to say, you know, you do what. I mean, I often wouldn't use my first one on God evangelism if people have walked in the door and are saved. They know the basics. We'll skip straight to war. But I think they're most effective that way. I don't know what you guys think about that ration.
Yeah, very much the same. I mean, if somebody came in with a question about a certain issue, or somebody within, you know, the church has been around for a while, you know, had a question about, just as you say, basics of the structure of church, something like that, you might pick out that book particularly and say, go, you never read it that, or something. Yeah. But otherwise, if you're going to go through them, you know, there is a track there.
Yeah. So I've been asked a question which I have no clue. So let's have a look at this.
What is parsimony? What do you mean?
We could use the word parsimonious. Do they encourage an everyday whole life submission to Jesus rather than a guide to fit into a middle-class church? If so, how?
It feels like a leading question.
Well, yes, that's a question. That's a statement-y question, isn't it?
So, is your book good, or is it the kind of book I hate?
Yeah. We wrote it so people would, if from our background, would fit nicely into middle-class church. In fact, there's book number 11 is where you buy your corduroys from, your cardigans, and some nice slip-ons.
Yeah.
And so that's just it with the
public. She goes for everyone.
I'm not sure what the question's asking. Does it encourage a whole life submission to Jesus?
Hope so.
Rather than fit into a middle-class church. I'm not quite sure what that means. Anyone want to help me? I would hope it's a whole life.
Well, all of us, or three of us, are in schemes. You know, our churches aren't middle class. You know, we purposely came here. We were part of a ministry that exists to plant churches in these communities that reflect our communities. We're not trying to plant middle class churches. By the way, we're not trying to plant working class churches. We're trying to plant biblical churches that people get taught to love and serve Jesus in.
This is not an anti-middle class set of studies.
Yeah, exactly. We want to teach the Bible. We want to try and teach it in a language that people in our community get. But the truths of it, the scriptures and the things it demand of us are the same regardless of your background. And so, yeah, we're trying to aim at, you know, people who love Jesus, walk with him all their lives, you know, in submission to him. Yeah.
I'm not sure I know how to write a guide to fit into a middle-class church. I might try it. It would be hilarious.
Yeah, you wouldn't be my first choice, Mez.
Yeah, thanks, bud. Yeah, Right. If for want of any other questions, it's 8:15, which I was told was the cut-off point. Unless any of you guys feel like you want to say anything more.
I would just say on this stuff, especially for guys who would struggle to read, the guys Dan James and Matt Oliver have just started a new podcast called What Now, which is particularly aimed at new Christians about just trying to understand a lot of the same issues that we talk about in this. So if there are people who, for reading, would just be prohibitive, hopefully a podcast might be slightly easier. So it might be worth checking out if you've not seen it already. Again, thinking about what Mike was saying, these are getting, unless I'm mistaken, they're being translated into Spanish and Portuguese. I know our first, maybe all our books it's being done right now.
Awesome.
So I'm hoping, because again, we've got a massive audience in South America, for instance, and so who are, particularly Latin America, are really struggling for resources like this. Hence another reason we made the stories of the different books, different people. And again, for women out there, Sharon Dickens, our women's worker, has written 2 of these books from a female scheme perspective as well. So we are trying to get a broad range. Right, we've got some final winners: Rosie Tate, Miriam Manley, and Skip VD. I certainly hope you do. Victor, does the series talk about the topic of money? Did we talk about money? I don't think we do we? Any of the books talk about money, boys?
There's a little bit in one of the chapters on Proverbs about money.
Is there?
Yeah,
no, not as a massive topic. Again, let me emphasize, this is what you would teach people in the a basic fact. It's not everything that you would, teach people, but it's the basics. We would teach our people about those topics, but money is a very complicated issue in our communities. We're going to need to probably write a book that in all seriousness would be a book on its own. Okay, Willie, you've not sent me a message, but I'm assuming it's over. Listen, thank everybody for watching, all 3 of you. Well done for winning. Did the guy in the undies stay on, Andy?
I have no idea. His name's Dougie Affleck. So
Dougie Affleck. Yeah, I think I've met him.
Yeah, you have.
Thank you for staying on. Thanks, boys, for writing the books. Thanks for being part of this. That's all I've got to say, really. Over and out. How do you end these things? Oh, hang on. Okay, we're done.
So I think they told us like 30 times how to end this thing.
I don't know if he means we're done or I'm done or I'm not sure.
That's a problem for
never
future
writing
guys.
any books ever again. Find a new publisher.
Easy for that, Willie. I